Let people file in. Hello, everyone. My name is Chris, and welcome to Powerhouse Arena's virtual events. I'm very happy to be hosting the launch for In Our Other Lives by Theodore Wheeler. I want to thank everyone for coming. You can ask questions through the Q&A function on your screen, or else through the chat function, which we'll have open. And please buy the book at powerhousebookstores.com. I just posted the link in the chat, and it's also on the event page. Theodore will be in conversation with Katie M. Flynn, and I'll introduce them now. Katie M. Flynn is a writer, editor, and educator based in San Francisco. She is the author of the novel The Companions, and her short fiction has appeared in Colorado Review, Indiana Review, Masters Review, and Tin House, among other publications. She's been awarded Colorado Review's Nelligan Prize for Short Fiction, a fellowship from the San Francisco Writers Grotto, and a Steinbeck Fellowship in Creative Writing. Katie holds an MFA from the University of San Francisco and an MA in Geography from UCLA. Theodore Wheeler is the author of the novel Kings of Broken Things and Bad Faith, a collection of short fiction. His work has appeared in publications including the Southern Review, the Kenyon Review, Narrative Magazine, and Boulevard. A graduate of the Creative Writing program of Creighton University, Wheeler teaches at the University of Nebraska at Omaha, covers a civil law beat for a national news service, co-directs Omaha Lit Fest, and sidelines as a bookseller for the Dundee Book Company roving book cart, one of the world's smallest bookstores. Thank you.
Well, thanks, Chris. So I think I'm going to go first. That bio sounds really funny now because it makes it seem like I'm a very busy person, although I'm not doing like almost any of that now, of course. So I'm going to read from my new book, In Our Other Lives, which came out on March 3rd. It's a novel that's kind of structured as a spy novel, but it's more or less a domestic novel within that those constraints. Where it's told from the perspective of an NSA FBI investigation into a family that whose son has disappeared and then reappeared while working as a missionary in Pakistan and shows up in a terrorist video. So they're looking into his family to kind of find out whether he is part of this group that he's emerged with, or whether he is kind of a pure victim, I guess, in this sense, or somewhere in between. But a lot of the story that's told through this lens of surveillance focuses on this family and the relationship between Nick and Elizabeth Holland, where they had married and then conceived a child pretty early in their marriage while they're living in Chicago. And Nick ends up leaving not long after the birth of their son, Caleb. So I wanted to read just a little bit from early on in the book, the more or less is this inspector voice, this NSA voice, thinking about why Nick left when he did, when, you know, it seemed like their life would have been in some ways at its peak, or, you know, its early peak. Why did Nick leave Elizabeth and Caleb when they all lived together in Chicago? He wasn't a bad father. In fact, he was good with Caleb, better than most new fathers with an infant, better than most experienced fathers. Both of them wanted kids, she sure than he, once they were married. Elizabeth found an entry-level job with an advertising agency that specialized in direct mail campaigns. The gig didn't pay much, less than Nick's loading and unloading pop bottles at a warehouse, as a matter of fact. But she was insured and maternity leave was in the benefits package. It's better to have them young, Elizabeth said. Who wants to be in a wheelchair when your kid graduates high school? It was almost disappointing to Nick how fast he knocked up his wife. He'd hoped it would be drawn out, making love without worry over the course of a year, maybe two. But it happened so quickly, probably the second time they tried to make a baby, just like that. Do you think it will be a girl or a boy? Elizabeth asked him that March after she showed him the positive. What will we name it? Dick quit smoking once Elizabeth was pregnant and tried to quit drinking, but was less successful at that. still went out with friends after work to the Touch of Class lounge because the beer was cheap and he was thirsty and frustrated and scared by what was happening back at the apartment where a child was growing inside Elizabeth's abdomen. Not yet a child, a peanut with a tail and eyes like a tadpole. Sometimes he came home late from the bar with an off-sale bottle, and Elizabeth could hear Nick and his friend, Donnie from work, when they were halfway down the block, their piercing, belligerent voices. Donnie had long hair and a scraggly beard. Dreadlocks grew in his beard, that's how scraggly. He was the kind of guy who set up shots of Malort on the bar when Nick used the pisser. They were shouting and jovial about how Donnie leaned out his minivan at a stoplight and pissed right there in the street. Nick walking along, swinging the off-sale bottle, more Malort, in its bag until the plastic gave and the bottle burst out the bottom to the pavement and broke. Booze spread over the concrete. Nick still invited Donnie in. They drank the cranberry vodka in the fridge until Donnie finally left. Nick stunk like beer and vodka and cigarettes when he lay next to her, but he swore later on that it wasn't him who was smoking, as if that was the most important thing. The parking lots out where he worked were all abandoned. Trees grew through cracks in the asphalt, even at the place Nick worked, so tractor trailers had to slalom trunks. Silver maples, along with a few black walnuts and trees of heaven. Nick would have noticed, as he knew things like that. He was plagued by the idea that Elizabeth and the kid could both die during a botched delivery, and what he'd do to get by in case that happened. On his days off, he rode the L like a tourist. Even though he'd lived in Chicago a few years, he was awed by the city. The constant noise, the tight spaces, the idea he should be afraid of the people around him. All these things, being made a stranger. Chicago was very different from where he grew up, especially the winters out west on the farm, the silent conspicuous then, no cicadas, no June bugs, no thunder, just his feet scuttling along the iced over field. In the city there was always the noise of things bumping into each other, the steel on steel of the L. He rode the L to Rogers Park to look at the clinic there, just to look. Rode south to the Loop before it returned back north, the Red Line, because it passed Wrigley, and before that, DePaul, right next to the field where Elizabeth used to play soccer before her injury. Nick never saw her play. That was her prior life, the life of Sports Liz. But he liked seeing the field, seeing campus, that neighborhood where they went on dates. As quickly as the train stopped, it started again, and DePaul was a memory. Wrigley Field, a glimpse out the smog-streaked window of an L car. Sometimes he stayed on to the end of the line, that mysterious Howard mentioned on the loudspeaker, to see if such a place actually existed, and who, if anybody, made it that far. Howard did exist. There was a strip mall there. A grocery store. That day, it is noted, Nick got off at Loyola and grabbed the coffee at a Dunkin' Donuts under the L, then walked around bombed out parking lots. It wasn't such a bad place, Nick saw, once you got away from the station. The building small, mostly two-story, and he could see the sky, the low, dreary clouds. He strolled slow and sipped his coffee, and he arrived so quickly, the clinic sort of snuck up on him. There was a storefront. Nick didn't know what he expected, activists, picketers, evangelicals. But there was only one girl sitting out front, her hand bound in rosary beads. The girl wore a navy blue pea coat, pink snow boots, and sat on a rectangle of cardboard to keep warm. Warmer, anyway, because she'd probably prayed there before and froze. Nick stopped and stared, but the girl acted like he didn't exist. He didn't. That is, he didn't matter. Not a solitary man looking at the red brick of a storefront like he'd never seen red brick before. A man staring at a building like he'd never seen a building. One shared by a handyman and a dentist and an abortion clinic. It was only an office, the windows with shades pulled tight from ceiling to floor, and no shouting evangelicals with gritty photographs. Only that girl with the rosary who was so cold on the pavement she kept her eyes closed. Nick set his coffee on top of a blue postal service box and waited 10 minutes before he went home. He wanted to see a woman go in the clinic, wanted to peek through the open door and see what happened to the woman, if she was sucked inside, door locked behind her. Maybe the clinic was closed. It was a Monday. Nick forgot all about that before long. The idea didn't return until after Caleb was born, until he held the kid every morning before Elizabeth got out of bed, and Nick would want to die, remembering how he rode the red line up there to the clinic. Thank you. And I think Katie's going to read next now.
Sure. Thanks, Ted. So, hi everyone, thanks for coming. I'm going to read from my novel, The Companions, which also came out on March 3rd. Ted and I share a book birthday. My novel is set in a near future world where the dead can be uploaded to machines and kept in service of the living. When it opens, California is under a prolonged quarantine in the wake of a pandemic. So I'm going to actually read from the second chapter. And it's set in an elder care facility in Del Norte County, California, which is close to the Oregon border, and it's narrated by Cam, a young caretaker in the facility. This section takes place 2 years after quarantine began. The day the companions came was always exciting. The residents would never admit it, but I could see their busying. Their nice clothes, smelled their brushed teeth, their too strong perfume. I liked Companion Day because everyone made an effort, most of all me. It was my job to build buzz around the event, posting daily reminders to the rec room screen, arranging the reception table, making sure to have extra chargers on hand in case the ones the agency sent were bunk. That had happened before. What a disaster. Most importantly, I contacted the agency in neighboring Crescent City, made appropriate selections, age, era, sophistication. I tried to get the companions who'd died suddenly, car collisions, freak accidents. No one at the Jedediah Smith elderly care facility needed to hear about the process of dying. The best models were beyond our meager budget, but low end would do. When the companions told their stories, the residents listened with rapt attention, hands folded, nodding along. It could be anything: a trip to the market, standing in line for a movie, getting a teeth cleaning, as long as it was from before. The residents found the past tense soothing. It was something I noticed, how they bristled when I spoke of now. We didn't show them the news, and they didn't ask for it, not that I blamed them. Last time I tuned in, I'd learned that quarantine had come down statewide, borders shut. For our safety, they said. Not exactly comforting. If I wanted the headlines, I had to catch them on my own time, and at night I preferred the quiet. Caretaking took a lot out of me. I would meet James in the redwoods past curfew. In the caretaker's handbook, breaking curfew was a fireable offense, but behind the tall perimeter fence of Jedediah Smith, nestled in 12 acres of dense redwood forest, 6.5 hours north of San Francisco, we hadn't had a stray visitor in all my 5 years of service. And so far, well, Tina, our middle-aged supervisor, hadn't complained about the couples who congregated in the woods behind the dorms. To avoid the others, James and I met below the residence windows, knowing they'd never hear our knocking sex, sending me to oblivion. James grinned at me as he gave the rec room a final sweep of his push broom. I smiled back shyly, making a point not to talk to him. Professionalism, that was of the highest order to me. Tina caught me at the refreshment table. She was wearing a new suit for the event, pinstripes and pale pink. Have you set out enough refreshments? No one's eating. They're all too excited. Excited, well, I can't tell you how much it pleases me to hear that. What a wonderful job you've done, kiddo. It was important to us all that the day went well, especially the children of the residents. They couldn't come in person, given travel restrictions, so they paid extra for the companionship program and expected to hear positive results when they screened their parents. If not, Tina would get an earful and there would be a cascading effect, blame and anger making waves through the whole facility. You did a sweep of the rooms? Tina asked. I did. Good. I want them to enjoy themselves, but not too much. She shifted her attention to the Hernandez couple staring glumly at the refreshment table's array of healthy beverages and snacks, mostly plucked out of our own garden by the resident doctor, Dr. Tim, he insisted we call him. He was the only one of us with a green thumb and interest in growing things. Even he was in the rec room, watching out the window for the Metaspan. In addition to arranging Companion Day, one of my responsibilities was to confiscate the residents' sweets and booze, their porn, anything that might overexcite them or mix unpredictably with their meds. It was a mystery to me how they got the stuff, since there were rarely any visitors and all packages were inspected upon delivery. They must have had someone on the inside, a staff member, I figured, smuggling it in for them. When I found their stashes, I liked to give them one last chance, one last sip or peep or bite. They liked me. I liked being liked. The bell sounded and James was at my side. You look hot, he said. Stop it, they're here. Following protocol, I slipped on my mask. The odds of the Metis drivers being carriers were low. No doubt they were tested regularly, but the precautions were not optional. I unlatched the door and stuck my head out, struggled my hands into gloves, enjoying the flood of cool breeze. Got your companions, ma'am. Wonderful. I looped in a signature on the man's tablet with my latex finger. So unsatisfying, those interactions, masked, maintaining safe distance, no touching whatsoever. Here I was with a stranger, someone who lived out there, who got to be in the world, and I could never think of anything to say. The rec room went quiet. The residents' faces were so eager, so hopeful, as they watched the plastic wheeling procession, all low-end identical twins, save the scars their stout white bodies had taken on since companionship. The perfect height for visiting with a seated person or child. Their hooks not good for much besides holding hands. That's the other reason I liked Companion Day. I might be able to encourage a smile, but happiness, that was harder. The companions, they could do that, light the residents up from the inside. It was, I was certain, the best kind of therapy. And I'll stop there.
Yeah, I love that part because when you come into the book, like it is just kind of like a strange experience since it's speculative, or like it takes a little bit to get into the world, like it does with any book. But like I feel like that part you just really start to feel it a little bit more. It feels like a little bit more of a warmer experience, which is like the eerie part of the companions. To like once you start realizing that there's still people in different ways, what they're feeling, but. Anyway, it starts to get complicated there, so I like it a lot.
I like that section too because I feel like I've been thinking so much about elder care facilities and the isolation that these folks are in, you know, and families being unable to visit their older, you know, their matriarchs and patriarchs. It's, to me, that's one of the parallels that's felt a little too eerie in terms of what we're experiencing and what I wrote.
Yeah. I guess I don't know, I'm sure you've been asked this a lot, at least on Twitter, I know you have, but just like, what has it been like to have this novel come out during this time, like specifically like early in March when like nobody really knew what was going on exactly or where this was headed? I don't know, like what has been the weirdest part of it, or is it just kind of like too bizarre to comprehend in some way?
Well, I think, you know, The idea of like imagining a pandemic is one thing, but living through it is an entirely different experience. And sure, there have been parallels, and yes, I've been thinking about pandemics for a while, but it's just, the experience is changing me, it's changing my children, it's changing our lives in really profound ways. And I think, one of the sort of perhaps least important things is that, yeah, it's impacted the debut of my, my debut novel, which is disappointing, but it's, in comparison to other things that people are coping with, it seems like a small problem. I do think it personally, like I was really aware of how companions, these uploaded dead, the inside machines, might think about things like memory and time differently. But what I've noticed is that during this shelter in place, I'm experiencing time differently and memory as well. So I don't feel, it's like the differences that I've drawn in my mind between humans and companions, they really start to disappear.
Yeah, that's so interesting. I've noticed that too. Like I just have been thinking about things that I haven't thought about in years and years, and like, where did that come from? Or I don't say everyone in my house, it seems like we can't turn our brains off when we sleep. It's just like these memories keep coming back. And it is, I don't know, that is an interesting parallel. Because I see that a lot with my parents too, or saw with my grandparents, where they live so much time in the past that and it's just kind of get stuck in their memories. But like, I don't know, I guess we're all kind of doing that now, just since we're not getting enough immediate stimulus as we typically would have been.
Sure. And we rely on technology for our connections with others, and, it's just a sort of, it's not, a solution to the problem. It's not a solve to our isolation and our loneliness. But at the same time, I can imagine people being willing to bring new forms of technology into their homes to distract themselves, to make themselves feel connected and less alone. I feel like technology is something that our books have in common. In the case of your novel, of course, it's in the form of government surveillance and information gathering. And this isn't, I love the structure of your book because it's, these series of files. So, have this sort of feeling of being surveilled that's embedded into the very structure of the novel. And nothing feels very firsthand or very reliable. What do you think about this notion of like getting at the truth, of knowing in this information age that we're living in?
Yeah, I mean, that idea of truth or like definitiveness, which is somewhat the promise of like having more information and having more facts, but I think it often works the other way, like that there's just too much information and people are inconsistent. People change like from day to day, even sometimes. So knowing more about them or knowing everything about somebody's past doesn't necessarily tell you that much about like who they're going to be, or even, I don't know, even what they were then, just that our interior lives are so different from our exterior lives, which is another thing I feel like in isolation, you realize like how different your interior person can be, and like what kind of life you live inside of your own head compared to like, when you were being social 80% of your time or whatever, like what a different person you were than when you're alone 98% of your time. So I think that was a lot what I thought about, just, so much from the character's perspective that they want to be alone, that they want to, live their own life without having either, their family impose upon them, their parents, their spouse, or, their government or their pastors or whoever, the different things people run away from in the book. But the narrator is so different from that, where the narrator wants to know everything. And I think that was the idea of technology, where it came from, is just like, why do governments often have this desire to know everything about their citizens? And it's not really new for the United States. This is just kind of the new iteration. Like, I don't know, I feel like Imperial Germany did this over 100 years ago. It was just all on paper. But But this idea of spying, and like, I think a lot of, which I'm not sure the book answers this, but just an exploration of that, of like, why do we want to know this about other people, or why does the government want to know this? And what does it mean to have these servers that can record almost all existence in a surface way? But like, for what purpose then? Because it can't really be comprehended by the mind of any one person at that point.
Right. It seems as if, and it also must, it's such an expensive endeavor and it requires so much energy to surveil an entire country.
Right.
And for it to be so, I mean, you really, I feel like in your book, you really see so many experiences in which the surveillance is just, it's wrong, or it's telling one story, but what's really happening is something else entirely. And with all of the research that Agent Schwaller has devoted to Elizabeth's brother Tyler, who has disappeared, we still have like no notion of how he ended up in this situation. We also don't clearly know whether he's there voluntarily or as a hostage, right? So that feeling of the unknowing is just really, really embedded into your novel. I feel like with every character. But I'm especially interested in Tyler and his faith, and like how does he end up in this situation?
Yeah, and I think, I don't know, like, I think as a novelist, I like leaving mysteries in the book, especially when characters like that, like, it's kind of can be annoying for some readers, since the book is structured loosely as a thriller. It kind of plays with those genre elements, but it doesn't solve the mystery at all. A lot of things are left unsaid or unwrapped up in different ways like that. But I think for Tyler, he's just more about desire, just more about that kind of following his id, and the fact that he's constantly reaching out. And I guess just knowing different people who are like that, where he finds himself in tribal land in Pakistan because, looking for this thing, like looking for God, looking for acceptance, or people who will believe, his desires are legitimate. And it seems like kind of out there, but the more I researched it, like, I almost feel like I underplayed his character some just for like the people who actually do that.
I find his character really interesting, and it's mentioned a couple times that he has a messiah complex, but of course this is in the files. We don't know that this is necessarily true, right? But he is there to proselytize,
right?
And it's almost as if he's trying to find a way to be special. He can't seem to find his purpose. So for me, his character really reminds me of those people who feel disenfranchised and sort of left behind, and then they seek out these sort of kind of out there ways of being special.
Yeah. And I'm sure we've all done it in our own ways too, but it's just kind of like when you're young and go on your first big trip to some place, and it's just so new and so different, and then you kind of adopt whatever from that culture. Like, you buy the clothes that people wear there, you buy the hat, and then you come back and like maybe you have an accent for a while, but it's just like that excitingness of being something different and being seen. And then some people take it farther than others, but I think we've all been there at some point too. I did want to ask about the companions too, or just, you talked about structure, because I thought that was something both of our books had in common. But like, how did you come to the structure of your book, where you do cover a lot of different perspectives? You're covering a few years in time frame, so there's a lot going on. I don't know, did you ever feel like it was too risky to try to braid like so many different characters' perspectives together? Like, had you ever tried writing from a more omniscient perspective, or was it kind of just like, once you heard it in these voices and it felt right, you just followed it, or what, I guess?
Well, I think a few things. Like, first of all, I generally am a pretty voice-driven writer. Once I find the voice, that's when I'm able to like really move with a story. So there's that. And the novel is told from 8 different points of view. And some of them are human, some of them are companion. When I originally drafted it, it actually had 11 points of view, but our agent, Stephanie Delman, talked me down.
Yeah.
I had this rule system set up for the novel where each chapter was going to be from a different point of view all the way through the novel. And I was very stubborn about my rules. And then after speaking with Stephanie about it, made the choice to circle back and tell some of these new characters sections towards the end from, characters from the beginning of the novel, then take over and tell those parts. So we cut 3 of the points of view. But it was always important to me, first of all, to represent both the human point of view and the companion point of view. And also to just give sort of this sort of ensemble experience of what companionship would be like. I think when it comes to a new technology, it's pretty interesting to see how it impacts people's lives, regardless of their where they live or their background or whatever. And so I wanted to depict that. And I also wanted to show the technology from the time it's released until the point at which companions are recalled. So the novel takes place across a 20-year time frame, and it mostly follows the journey of Lilac, this 16-year-old companion. You really get to see her change and evolve and grow up, even though she's been uploaded to a machine, she still has this experience of growing up, experiencing first love, things like that. And so I wanted to show her trajectory over a longer period of time. And I realize for some readers, it's somewhat controversial to do so much point of view shifting and to jump around so much in time. But it felt important to me that the book be depicted in this way for, just demonstrating the experiences of a lot of people with the technology.
Yeah, and I think, I don't know, at least my experience reading it, like once you get into a voice-driven book, like you're just following the voice anyway. And I think that's kind of the power of these books, that they can do that. Or it's like, okay, well, I'll do this because I'm just really listening to this person tell a story anyway. So like, why does it matter like where we are now or what time we're at? Like you just kind of enjoy that. If it's not tied to like factual experience or something, like you can do that.
That's the fun thing about writing. You can do whatever you want. Yeah. And readers will let you know whether they like it or they don't like it, and I mean, the point of view of your novel is pretty interesting too, because even though it's, it's told in third person, we're kind of getting Agent Schwaller's sort of take on the characters for most of the novel. And he's an interesting character. He has this reputation as being a savant because of his work on the Unabomber case. Yet he's kind of a ghost too, I would say. You really don't learn much about him. And he sort of has this kind of creepy relationship with Sandy, who is a coworker of Elizabeth's, and he actually surveils her after they break up, which I just found so bizarre and also so expected for his character. But I think what's so interesting to me is that he stuck around and was observing Elizabeth and Nick in their lives, even after it was clear he was going to get no good information out of this, that neither of them knew anything about what was happening with Tyler. Why do you think why do you think he does that? Why does he stick around?
I think, to me, a lot of it was just the idea of this character who wants to insinuate himself into other people's lives, and that he really doesn't have much of a life of his own that isn't based around observing and investigating other people. And that would be a pretty weird way to live for 30 years. So just kind of like letting him be odd in that way, in that, I don't know, maybe one of the less realistic parts of an FBI agent for the book, but just that he's just interested in people at a certain level and interested in stories. And, of course, wants to solve crimes along the way, but, he's unorthodox. He doesn't play by the book. So this is what he does. Which I don't know. I kind of like too, that just thinking about, I always like to write characters that are kind of bad at their jobs, especially like a law enforcement character. So there's so many FBI stories, but like almost always they're just really, really good at being an FBI agent, which I find kind of annoying most of the time. It's like most people aren't really good at stuff. And I don't know, I kind of like having characters who aren't either sometimes. So
I love that.
Yeah. But it is, I think, this idea of him too getting caught up in the surveillance and having too much information, where I think he struggles with that too, that he can't just let go. I was thinking about this with like Facebook memories the other day, where if they, in a Freudian sense, like don't allow people to repress bad memories anymore, or like if it makes it harder for us to go on with our days because we're constantly being bombarded with these images that like maybe we shouldn't be thinking about all the time. But that idea of that connection between memory and technology is like so present in our everyday lives now in different ways.
Totally. And I feel like, you know, something that really interested me in writing my novel is just the idea of memory and how remembering, the act of remembering actually changes memories. So I wonder to what extent these Facebook memories, it's like Facebook remembering for us
Right.
and changing our experiences of our memories, you know?
And it does, like, I don't know, it's that imposition, like it's not asking like, or what do you feel like today? Like what evokes this memory? It's just like, hey, look at this now. Like,
Well, and
I
the
don't know.
fact that it's an algorithm that's causing us to experience memories, like an algorithm that's not smart, you know, that has no
Yeah.
intelligence, is creating memories for us or triggering them in that sense.
I was thinking that too, or just like Netflix, like seems horrible at picking out shows, or like the Amazon algorithm, like usually just suggests books that I've already bought from them or bought from them like 6 years ago. And like, it's like, are these the same algorithms that are supposed to be understanding how we feel about all these things that like, I don't know. Maybe NSA has better algorithms, but
I
maybe
don't know,
not.
maybe,
Yeah.
maybe not.
Maybe they're worse. Like, who knows?
I wrote an essay for Tor.com about artificial intelligence a while back, and I was doing quite a bit of research. And I read Janelle Shane's book, You Look Like a Thing and I Love You, which is a really great book about AI, in my opinion, if you don't know anything about it and you want to learn.
Yeah.
But she describes artificial intelligence as commonly being just about as smart as an earthworm,
Yeah.
you know? And what's fascinating to me too is that, like, when it comes to AI, you know, they have inputs and they have outputs, but we have no idea how they arrive at their decisions. That, you know, like, they're modeled after living brains, and we don't really understand living brains entirely yet. And so we're using that to then create this technology that's so influential, you know, that recommends to us, like you said, our books, our films and TV, but even recommends our friendships.
Mm-hmm.
And yet does so without any real intellect behind it.
Yeah. It is, I don't know. It always amazes me how much we like give up or how much power we kind of delegate without really thinking about it.
Well, and to what extent we're even aware that AI is influencing our choices, you know? There's been lots of controversies around AI being used in law enforcement or being used in like job recruitment and hiring tools
Mm-hmm.
or approving mortgages and loans, you know, and these systems that becomes quite clear are based on old or bad data, you know, and thus the results are kind of trash results.
Yeah. I mean, it's kind of like Twitter bot then, which I've read with like the hiring practices. It's like they end up being more racist than like the humans they were supposed to be less racist than, or
Well, what's hilarious is they're typically trained on like old data. You know, the data is like from way back, and so it's yeah, you're right. It's even more racist than what it would have been otherwise with the humans in that position presently.
yeah. This is so crazy. I did want to ask you, I had like noted a part of your book, which is in the second part, but it was like walking through San Francisco.
Mm.
I don't know, I have an arc and it's on page 60, but it was like describing San Francisco. And the quote is, it's as dead as this place on the streets. People live like hiving bees in their towers. It was impossible for me to picture. I had spent my childhood on those streets, taking the end standing, body swaying and bumping with the glide of the train. I'd go downtown with my girlfriends to shop or make fun of tourists, gawk at cute skateboarders in shredded jeans. We'd weave down to the jammed sidewalks holding hands like a chain of animal babies so we wouldn't lose one another in the shadows of the towers. Which I really love that part too, but it made me think about like in your book and like what is futuristic and what is now and like what is past. And like when you're writing that, are you looking at like this kind of speculative San Francisco, or is that like the experience of walking through parts of San Francisco today or 5 years ago?
Well, I think I'm always projecting out and extrapolating. Like, where will we be, in 60, 70 years. And in the case of San Francisco, I do see, we're in this amid this like tremendous tech boom right now. The city is growing vertically at an amazing rate. We have towers that are built so quickly that they start to sag and, lean.
Mm-hmm.
And old San Francisco is disappearing in place of sort of these like bento box condos. And so I think I'm thinking about how technology is changing the city now, how it's changing culture, the culture of San Francisco with the economic disparity, unlike we've ever seen before, more billionaires per square foot here in San Francisco than any other city in the world, while also, we're living through like this homelessness crisis. And it's especially dangerous right now with this outbreak that we're dealing with. So I think when I'm writing about San Francisco in the case of the companions, I am thinking about it as I'm experiencing it now and how it feels to me. But I'm also thinking about, my fears and concerns about the future and where we're going. And I think those towers, they really become emblematic of this tremendous disparity. It's a place for folks to safely ride it out, this outbreak, while folks on the street who aren't in the towers are put in tremendous danger. And so I feel deeply concerned about the direction my city is going in. I've lived here longer than, I'm from the Midwest too, but I've lived here longer than I've lived anywhere else. So it's become really my home. And I've never really cared as much about a place as I do this place, which, it's interesting because I feel like a lot of my writing is very Bay Area focused and a lot of your writing is very Omaha focused.
Mm-hmm.
Like your previous novel, right? So I wondered if you could talk a little bit about Omaha and sort of how it plays into your work, how it inspires your work.
Yeah, I think it's my previous novel, which was historical fiction set in Omaha, 1917 to 1919, so World War I era. Like, it was interesting because then, it's very obviously you had to imagine so much of it, where Omaha has almost completely torn down like its heritage. At the time, like Omaha was the third biggest city west of the Mississippi in the U.S., so it's pretty prominent then. But I don't know, we've torn down almost everything. We have the single largest destruction of a national heritage site in the country, where we tore down our whole warehouse district in the 80s to keep a company called ConAgra here, who just left 2 years ago to move to Chicago because they wanted to be in refurbished warehouse buildings that Omaha just doesn't have for some reason, which is a hilarious irony. But I think with writing In Our Other Lives, which is said in 2008 mostly, but it still kind of felt like writing historical fiction where the neighborhoods had changed so much. And that was when I had first moved to Omaha, and that was the year when my oldest daughter, my first child, was born. So I think a lot of those memories are very vivid, which enabled me to write about them just because of those experiences were being so novel. And again, how memory works. But a lot of it was just kind of weird, like driving around, like when we were doing the cover for the book, we had a lot of trouble finding the image at the bottom. It's like every place they found, like I just didn't feel like, it's like, well, that's not Omaha, like that's not Nebraska. And there was weird conversations where you like try to talk to 3 different people, like, well, this guy's in Toronto and somebody else is in New York, and trying to explain like what it should look like. But so I went around and took pictures of places that are depicted in the book, but it was somewhat difficult. It was like, well, like it didn't look like this 10 years ago. So it's like, I don't know, even I, like in some ways don't know what it looks like, or my memories of it are different than what it is now. But I feel like as an author, like that's one of the big part of our job is to write about places that we live, and just in that way, like the experience of walking down the street, like, just what did it smell like in the city then? Like, what was the light like? What buildings were there? What kind of businesses that people have affection for and that aren't there anymore? And just recording those moments is really, really important. Whether our books become, immortal or not, like hopefully there'll still be libraries in the future that, people can go and read about places and learn about what it was like, or at least, you know, go back and remember if Facebook isn't there to remind them.
You know, it's funny that you're talking about memory and place, because I feel like I only in the last maybe 5 years, I've lived in San Francisco for 17 years now. And it's only been like the last 5 or so years that I felt like I could start writing about it, like in a really, you know, in a way in which I felt like an expert. Like, I know the city, I know this place, I can write confidently about it. I used to write, a lot of my stories are set in the Midwest because I grew up there.
Where were you from in the Midwest?
Well, I was born in Chicago, but I mostly grew up in Tulsa, Oklahoma.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I lived there until I was 13, and then my parents moved me to Orange County, California, which was a culture shock. So yeah, but like, you know, it takes me a long time to feel like I know a place well enough to write about it. With the rare exception of those times I write about places I've never been to at all, occasionally. Mm-hmm. And that's its own experience. It's like, it's not based on memory. It's not based on the self. It's based on understandings that are sort of imagined of a place, which I find an interesting concept too. Like, I've never been to the Falkland Islands, but they feature in my novel.
Yeah, that's what I felt too. Like, I don't know, I have 2 scenes in Pakistan in my novel, and I went to like Northwest India 2 summers ago, but I've never been to Pakistan. And just like, I feel like with technology, with YouTube, talking to people, like reading things that, you know, people have been there, you can kind of approximate it. But it is such a weird experience, like, or such a different experience than, you know, walking down the street and recording what you see. Do you feel like it's harder to write about San Francisco, or it took longer just because it is such an iconic city as well? Like, I always wonder about that, where like, I kind of like Omaha because there aren't many books about it. Like, there aren't like a bunch of songs about it. So there isn't like this record that's gonna like, I have to contend with.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to like compete with other major works about San Francisco, you know what I'm saying? Like, and I think it's been done. It's been, you know, manifested in fiction before by lots of writers. So there is a sort of intimidation factor about doing a good job. And so perhaps it's both knowing it so well that I know I can offer something that feels personal and unique, but also just feeling more confident as a writer, you know, and feeling less afraid of tackling anything that I want to write about, you know, which to me is what keeps me interested and keeps me going. Which brings me to a question. Have you been writing during all of this?
Oh, somewhat. Like, it's been a weird year because I won a NEA fellowship. So like, my plans for this year were based around doing a lot of travel, and I was just starting a new novel that's set in Europe, in France and Germany, in the early days of World War II. So it's like, oh, perfect. Like, now I have the funds to like go there and write. So like, I've been doing a little bit of it, like moving in slowly with the book, but I think for a while it's just like, I can't write a novel right now, where it's too much to think about, it's too much to remember, and like trying to keep all those voices straight. So I started working on a story collection where I feel like I'm pretty close to having enough stories to bring together. It's like, well, then if I get like 2 days, I can work on a story. And like, that's been going better. I feel like the last like 3 or 4 weeks, I can get an hour or 2 in every afternoon where I lock myself in a room and don't respond when anyone tries to talk to me, and can work on these new stories. But so it's not like a lot new, but it's just kind of like rehashing old stuff and hopefully making it better. But how about you? Like, I don't know, where are you at?
Well, I just submitted a draft of my short story collection to my editor last week. And I was in the same boat as you. I was feeling like, and both as a reader and a writer right now, short fiction is what I can handle. I was working on a novel. I was about a new novel. I was about halfway through it. And that it's set in southern Idaho, and it's about a pair of sisters who fall in love with male conjoined twins in a town that's overtaken by sovereign citizens. So I mean, I really like it and I'm into it, but it's so complex, and I don't know that my brain is fully present with the writing. And the stories a lot of the stories that I'm working on for my collection are, like in your case, they're older. I wrote them a while ago. So what I'm really doing is revising them and trying to make them as strong as I possibly can. And that, for some reason, just works with my brain better right now than the notion of trying to write a new novel. That just seems kind of overwhelming.
Yeah, which I don't know. My plan is to, like, starting in July, hopefully, like, at least work on it more. And a lot of my my two novels before this are somewhat episodic too, which is not like a good way to be if you want to sell a lot of books, but like, it's like, okay, but that's fine. If that's the way I am, at least like writing in this situation should be easier for me than like if I was trying to write a really intricately plotted book where everything has to come together in the end. But so we'll see. We'll get there. Like I do kind of like rehashing the old stories, or just kind of going back to like being like hip deep in memory all the time during this in the last few months. But it's like interesting to go back to it, and like a couple of stories I had are ones that I always kind of liked but just never really worked. So it's like, what happens if I change everyone's names, or just like it's just like, if today is a waste anyway, if this whole month is a waste, then I can do stuff like that and it doesn't really matter. Like, well, what if like you can talk to the dog in this one, or the guy thinks he can talk to the dog? Like, is that worth trying? And like, and if it doesn't work out, like, you know, you're not out anything. Because
right. Except for time, of which that's like the one resource we have going for us during this situation.
Yeah, but I don't know. I always like to look for those moments, or like invitations to try something different, or just to reevaluate. And like, again, they're abounding everywhere at the moment. So like, it's something I kind of appreciate about like the pandemic. Along with just being home more. I know like a lot of people, or I'd kind of joked at the beginning of just being like too busy, but like almost everyone I talk to is just like, especially people with kids, or, you know, just like, oh, I haven't actually had dinner with my kids in 3 years, or like where we're not rushing out the door, or like haven't actually, you know, talked to my spouse or whatever, you know, just like anything coming together, having that time, or haven't sat alone and, you know, with my own thoughts for more than 15 minutes in however many years. So trying to find the bright side of this, I guess.
Yeah, I think it's worth it. And you know, it's funny, I've been thinking a lot about, it's like I read old stories and I'm like, does this even matter anymore? Does, you know, it's like the world has changed. Do my stories from before even matter? Do you ever have that feeling?
I have been, which always feels like the most dangerous, or just like, I don't know. I spend like most of my life trying to never think of that, like, or not wanting to know the answer, maybe. Right. But it can be good, like, I don't know. I mean, they're good questions to do, especially like, I think in writing, or it's like, because a lot of times I feel it's my first novel, which took me 7 or 8 years to work on, and I just like would never ask that question. And like, but I just really needed to at some point. It's like, does this matter? Like, does this need to be written? Would anyone care about this? And like, again, like the worst things to think about, but like, you know, if you want to be published and read, like eventually, like you got to have some response, right?
Yeah. Our agent just chatted and was like, all stories matter.
Thank you, Stephanie. See, this is why neither of us are like completely insane now, like someone to ground us.
Oh, I know. She talks me down off the cliff all the time. I'm like, I'm going to make this drastic change. And she's like, don't you dare.
Yeah.
Should we check in with, oh, sorry, what were you going to say?
I was going to say, it looked like we had 2 in the Q&A. We should probably get to. So I guess the first one, or how did you figure out the point of view in the novel for me? I think for my process, like I worked, or somewhat I had the basic domestic story of Nick and Elizabeth, and their marriage breaking up early and Nick running away. Really since I was like a junior in undergrad in college, and like had been working with these characters for, I mean, close to like 15 years in different stories, where I published a few short stories about it. So I had that, like, and then when I started working on the book, this was right after Edward Snowden had like kind of released his bombshell about how intensive NSA spying was. I thought about using that as a lens into it. But somewhat serendipitously, I read this new, or he's not a new author, he's been dead since '81, but a new to me German author, Uwe Jonsson, who wrote this great novel, Speculations about Jakob, which is about the Stasi spying on East German citizens at the time. And it just seems so similar in different ways. And I really fell in love with the way he wrote the voice of the book, and his characters were somewhat similar, where there's people telling their own stories in their own voice. There's a narrator, there's this investigator with the Stasi who's telling his story from his point of view, and they all just kind of layer over each other in the book, which I just thought was so cool how he made it work. His version is even more confusing because he, like in mine, I use like labels and say this is the time and place and this is who is speaking, and he doesn't really bother with that. Like, you just gotta figure it out. But anyway, so like for the point of view, like I used Speculations about Jakob as a novel for my book. Like the first draft, like pretty closely, where it's just like on page 60, I should try to introduce a new character, or like, and have like this type of insinuation, or just like, okay, like move scenes here, go to a new place, or switch point of view here, which I had never really tried before. With my first novel, I kind of just wrote blind, but I think it helped a lot to just kind of have that. It's like where I didn't have to think about what I was writing about that day, and I could just focus more on character. But anyway, that's where the point of view came from, where I just kind of going off of that model and thinking about how, I guess, what it means to be spied on all the time, and like why we are spying on ourselves so much.
You kind of answered the second question too, which is, have you seen The Lives of Others?
I have. I love that movie too. But.
If anyone has another question, feel free to type it into the chat or into the Q&A. But I wanted to ask you about your work as a reporter, and both how it influences what you write about, but also how you write your fiction, I should say.
Yeah, so I've worked it's like 14 years now as a reporter where I cover civil law in the state of Nebraska. I think a lot of it, again, is just kind of coming across these characters and maybe spending a lot of time with bureaucrats who like are kind of, I don't know, I've never really had a lot of trouble, but you have to learn how to talk to people in government so that they will help you. But just seeing how they can kind of stymie people if they want to, or people that are maybe not being polite. So being around government people a lot, and I think has made somewhat of a difference, but I don't know. I think maybe just being more matter of fact about that too, and just being privy to people's tragedies a lot. Like, I think about that sometimes just covering lawsuits where like whatever is being filed is probably someone's worst day. And like, it's kind of weird to like spend most of my day reading through all of these people's tragedies, and like, hopefully, you know, it leads to a better life for everybody involved. But like most people don't go, or if you go to the courthouse, you know, it's not for a good thing. So I think about that a lot, and just thinking about people's stories and maybe just bring reverence to it and a respect for it. Which again, like learning from courthouse workers, where sometimes like you just have to joke about things to get through it, but other times, most of the time, you know, it is people's lives you're dealing with. So, you know, you treat that with the respect that you should. And I was thinking about that, or I watched Joker, the movie, like the other week, which I thought was like good in some ways, but like it just seemed like there was only one person in that movie, and everybody else was just like a potential murder victim, and like it just didn't really work for that, because it's like the filmmakers, the scriptwriter just didn't seem to really respect anybody else except for Joker in it. But it was like a good reminder, like if you, as a writer, like to want things to work, like you need to respect everybody, like even the throwaway characters. Like there shouldn't be throwaway characters.
Right. Let's not have throwaway characters. Well, I feel like that's so true of your novel. You treat your characters with a lot of respect. And I feel like that, especially with Elizabeth, who's like, to me, the emotional center of the novel. And she's experienced this horrible tragedy. Like, you know, first her husband takes off, and then her son dies, and he's quite young, and it's sort of an inexplicable death. And, you know, it really made me, you know, I felt like I could feel the work that you had put into understanding her grief, you know, and understanding like what she's been through. So I'm curious about that character in particular, because to me, she's so well drawn and so complex.
Oh, well, thanks. I mean, some of it maybe just being worried that I was not like treating her with respect early in the process, or that I just didn't understand her, and maybe like paranoia that I wouldn't be able to write her character or her point of view. So I think she was, the character that I spent the most time with by far, and just really thought about like her history or how she would get to that point, and where we didn't really have like a lot of too many similarities that much. Like I grew up in somewhat of a religious family, but not in a family of, fanatics that like Elizabeth does in the book. And I don't know. I think once I made her a college athlete, like that changed a lot too, because it just really, I knew people like that then, and could kind of see like, knew what it was like, where I wasn't a college athlete, but my brother was, and we had both just spent our entire boyhoods only really caring about sports, and like only just thinking about like, if you can be an adult who plays sports, like then you've kind of really made it. But nobody gets to do that really. And just like, what do you do when you're 19 and you can't play sports anymore? Or like, if you've played in college and you're spending 18 hours a day on sports, like what do you do when you can't do that anymore and it's just kind of ripped away from you? So I think that was kind of the big entry point for me.
That detail has actually, to me, helped me really relate and connect to her, because I was a soccer player and then I tore my ACL and had to have reconstructive surgery. And afterwards, I had the possibility of going back to soccer, but I opted out because I realized, I was like, I'm in college and I'm going to have to do soccer every single day. And wow, that sounds like a lot of soccer. And maybe I'm ready for some other things.
I think that, because that was the thing I really remembered, but just like when you could do other things and like you never thought about it before, and probably you ended up being that soccer player and like that level of commitment without really thinking about it. But like once you actually have the chance to make a choice, do you make the same choice? Like, I don't know. So she did seem right. Like I guess you know more, or would know more about her character than I do. So.
You did a great job.
All right, perfect.
Looks like we have a question from Cora. Hi, Cora. So following up on old material changing in the pandemic, are you tempted to think about pre-COVID material as historical now, or are you revising it toward this moment? What do you think, Ted?
I'm not really sure. I was actually thinking about this yesterday though, like if I should be doing that. Like I think I've left stuff that like I started writing in 2007 and it's still set in 2007. But it's like, is it an opportunity to set it in, or at least like 2017? It would be. I guess I didn't really think about setting it in 2020, but it's a good question to ask. I think like it does seem like there's an opportunity there. Like probably personally, like I think so slowly, it's hard for me to process what's happening right now in a way that I could write about it. But
well, and this is just such a strange experience, and I think it's hard to know. We're still very much in the thick of it. It's kind of hard to know what life will be like on the other side. I mean, in my book, there's an outbreak, and then there's a prolonged quarantine, and then it ends. And people forget pretty quickly about their fears, in the book anyway. So it'll be pretty interesting to see how that plays out in real life. As I mentioned earlier, I feel like some of my old stories, I do start to wonder, like, what do they matter anymore? And Stephanie's right, they do. But I will say that one of my stories that I wrote, my most recent story, involves a couple that's living and working out of the home together. And it's not during a shelter in place or a quarantine or anything like that. It's just people who work in tech, who work from out of their home, and they're leading this like relatively isolated life together. And the story is very much, to me, it's very much inspired by my experience with this outbreak, and about the isolation and detachment that, and also too, how I feel like sheltering with other people, it's like if you're having any sort of relationship difficulties at all, they really bubble to the surface.
Yes.
Everything feels very, very, raw and right there. So I've been trying to write about that a little bit.
Yeah, I agree with Amy. I mean, that does sound like really amazing. And So like, or just thinking about it, or like the historical corollary to this, where like polio, like with my parents, or I talked to my parents about this, where like they couldn't go swimming for a couple of years, and like it had completely changed how people lived in this country and around the world. You know, especially in the 50s, just where, you know, you weren't supposed to be around people at all. But my mom didn't remember it at all. And like, I saw an article, and only like 15% of people who lived through that actually remember it, that it happened. So like, I don't know, like, I wonder if it'll be similar to this, where like our isolation is more intense, but like how many of this will like 40 years later actually remember that this was a thing we did. But I think, I don't know, listening to you talk to you about your story too, like that kind of sense, like not so much writing about what we're doing now and what it's like to live in, you know, in 2020 in quarantine, but the kind of that feeling, that expression about like, I don't know, what it's like to live like right now, and like how do you express that? Like that seems so much more meaningful for me than maybe a play-by-play, or like the,
Right.
you know, we'll still have newspapers, you know, recorded in the Library of Congress if you want to know what it was like minute by minute.
I don't want to know. I mean, I don't want to read another, you know, like about this. I don't want to read about this experience in fiction right now, you know, which is funny because I wrote about it in my novel, but not this experience, but a very parallel one. But, you know, I don't want to read about that right now either. It's too fresh. It's too much of our every moment, you know, like fiction's supposed to sort of transport, and it's not very transportive.
Yeah.
Like it's literally what we're going through every day.
That's why I felt when everyone was reading The Plague, like Albert Camus, and like, it's like, I love that novel, but like, I really like don't need to spend my reading time like living through that.
Yes, I know. I recently read Severance, and that was, I mean, I love Severance, great book. But it felt like a lot to try to put myself through that. And I think about that all the time with my own readers. I'm like, who wants to read a book about a prolonged quarantine right now?
Yeah, but at least, I don't know, like people break out though, and they're not just going to spring break, like
Exactly.
they're trying to live. And I guess spring breakers are too, but. Oh, it looks like we have a question from Linda. Hi, Linda. Has there been any effect on your own experience with COVID-19 that you really feel has an impact on future stories? I don't know. I mean, maybe it's hard to tell now, but I think somewhat that sense of like just how it changes like my interior life more, or like how I feel about it. I don't know. Somebody had asked on Facebook or this afternoon, or Timothy Shafford, a great novelist himself, but just how many people wouldn't go back out, like once it's safe to go back out again, and not because they're afraid of getting sick or, you know, afraid of whatever, but just because they really came to appreciate how rich their internal life is and their interior life is, and like don't want to leave that. Like, and I think like that's kind of the question I'm at right now, where it's just like, how willing or how excited I will be to go back out, like when I can, or if I just won't as much. I think it's somewhat similar with writing, where it's like those kind of questions, like what does it mean to be isolated so long? Like how does that change us? Like I feel like those are worthwhile, but I'm just not exactly sure, like particularly with fiction, like how that would play out. I wish I was like smarter and faster to figure that stuff out on the fly, but
I think we all need some time, you know, and to just have this experience too. And also to be easy on ourselves. It's like, I feel like my brain is not quite firing the way it normally does. I don't feel quite as alert as I normally do. You know, I try to do all of the things I normally would have been doing to make myself feel that way, you know, exercise, sleep, like all of it. But it doesn't seem to be working as well, you know. I look at, you know, time moves differently. The days pass in weird ways, sometimes very rapidly, sometimes very slowly.
Mm-hmm.
I don't feel quite prepared to explore this experience, you know, through writing.
Yeah.
There.
Maybe like, I don't know, you do this too. Like I feel that too, or just like not feeling like myself hardly ever, but like just that we were supposed to be in New York this weekend, and like usually it's my anniversary, my wife's anniversary today too. So it's just like Thank you. But it's just like that parallel life that you would be living. And at some point, like that'll drop off, like when all the stuff you had scheduled, like doesn't, come up anymore. But it's, I don't know. I just feel like that too. Like there's another me or that parallel dimension me. And like, well, what is he doing now? Like, what is his life like? Where, like, I feel like I always did that, but it's just like so present in my life now. Like, so I don't know if like that's showing up more. I feel like the story I've been working on a lot lately, there is somewhat of that sense where a character is coming back from service in Iraq and he like just kind of messes up his coming home really poorly. And it's just like, it's like, just his wish that he had done better at that, like is the main emotion of the story, and like that kind of regret. But I feel like I'm feeling that all the time. Like, it's not like, I've done anything wrong necessarily. It's just like, you just really wish things were different so often. Like, and I feel like that feeling just comes out a lot in what I'm writing on now. So hopefully they're good stories and not just kind of completely regretful.
Well, I mean, if they're keeping you busy, that alone is
yeah,
a thing. So it looks.
I say like keep everyone all night, but I did want to ask about like, so you have a book of short stories coming out next year.
Yeah.
Like, I know it's hard to talk about short story collections, but is there like anything that kind of ties it together thematically or setting or like?
Yeah. Well, first of all, it's a collection of interlinked stories, and I like to think of them as sort of personal, political, and ecological disasters. And like the companions, it sort of veers into the terrain of genre fiction. There's like a little bit of horror, a little bit of magical realism, noir, dystopia, and then sometimes it's sort of teetering on the edge of satire. But the central focus is on the connections that are formed in dark times. So I feel like I've been writing disaster fiction for a while. I'm just running with it, with this collection. I like the different layers of disasters. You can have some that are really big and feel like catastrophic, and then some that feel very small and personal and quiet. But I like the ways in which it asks people to shift the way they think about themselves and their place in the world, and how it opens them up to new forms of connections.
Yeah, I like that. I mean, it definitely seems to be your moment. Like, I don't know that you're ready for it now that it's here, but but it is like, I think that was, or people ask that a lot, like, or just in your own panels, or like, why are people so interested in apocalypse all the time? And but it's like, I think it's, that moment of catharsis, or we all have those moments of destiny, where if you make one decision, something happens, and if you do something else, so it's just kind of like feels nice to maybe see the rest of the world suffering through it at the same time. I don't know.
Yeah, I feel like, not every disaster has to be a dystopia. You know what I mean? Like, the world we're living in right now feels like a dystopia, but is it really? I don't know that it has to go that direction. I feel like it can be deliciously funny sometimes, sort of terrible experiences can be that way. They can make one laugh. I feel like even though I've been, I think, generally down because of all of this stuff, I also feel like there's a sort of levity and hilariousness to my interactions with people,
Yeah.
that is happening right now. That's a little strange and I don't understand, but I'm just running with it because it's more fun than feeling down.
Yeah. It is like, I don't know, like it is kind of like it's a disaster until you start getting over it.
Yeah.
And like once you can see the humor, then it kind of loses its threat maybe a little bit.
Yeah, and and it goes in waves. It has moments where it feels just like the worst thing ever. And then other times when, like you were saying, there's also the quiet sort of intimacy with your family that comes out of it, time together, slowness. I feel like my life is the fact that I didn't have to go anywhere to do this reading. I'm thinking about the last time I was going to a reading and I was running late and I was stressing out, and you know what I mean? It's just little things like that. Life is able to come to you in a way right now, which I think is kind of an interesting and interesting and sort of relaxing shift in that sense.
Yeah, like there's no FOMO. I know people said that a lot too, but I think but it is kind of a nice part of it. Like, I don't know, we always try to live by like the dictum of like what is for you will find you, and just like not stressing out about every little thing. And like that's definitely hard to do in March and most of April, but I feel like, you know, I'm getting a little more hang of it now, and it's just like you just kind of have to live what life you're living like as it comes. Like you don't really have any other choice, so you might as well try to deal with it
and be very present. You
way.
can't, like you said, you can't really make plans, so you just kind of have to stay very much in this moment and not worry too much. And I try to think about the summer. I'm like, oh God, I'm gonna be home all summer with my kids. You know, we can't go on vacations, we can't do any of the things we had planned, and that is pretty scary to me. If I think about that. So I just try to focus on, okay, what do we got going on today? How are we gonna have fun today? You know?
Yeah, even like hour by hour, like.
Yeah. Exactly.
Well, anyway, this has been a lot of fun. Thanks a lot for doing this with me. I appreciate it. And I don't know, good luck with this book, which I really love so much. I'm excited for the collection to come out too. Like I too have been reading a lot more short fiction, so it'll be cool to see it. But thanks a lot, Chris and Powerhouse too, for hosting us.
So much.
Yeah, thank you both, Theodore and Katie. On topic of accurate location detail, I really like the Malort in the really takes you there. Yeah, thanks to everybody who asked questions. If you missed any of the event, we'll have it on YouTube soon. And please buy the books. It's 10% off for both of them.
That's great.
Bye.
Well, bye. Thanks a lot.
Hey, thanks so much. Thanks everyone for tuning in.